Hey everybody, Lieutenant Joe here for the Blue Heart Podcast, sponsored by Blue360Media.com, the greatest publisher of everything law enforcement and medical essential diagnostics. They are a group of 6 offices that do health screenings for any state worker in the state of New Jersey, county, state, federal, doesn't matter. Go there, you and 2 adults, and it costs you nothing to get screened. Make sure you're healthy. MedicalEssentialDiagnostics.com and Blue360 Media. And don't forget to like and subscribe to this channel. It helps keep us going. All right. So today we're going to talk a little bit about search warrants. Now, a search warrant is an essential tool to a law enforcement officer. You don't have to be a detective to do a search warrant. That's up to your department. But there are many, many departments, thousands of them, matter of fact, across the United States that are smaller agencies, and patrol officers might be doing search warrants. So we're going to cover some of the basics of a search warrant so that you understand exactly what you need and what you can do now to prepare yourself for a search warrant. So a search warrant there's several parts into a search warrant. The first thing you're going to do is you're going to do an affidavit. An affidavit is a legal document where you lay out the probable cause for the judge to review to decide whether or not he or she will give you a search warrant. So in this affidavit, you're going to start it out by saying who you are. I'm an officer of the Happytown Township for 7 years, and I conduct investigations. Whether you do it as a patrol officer or detective, doesn't matter. Then you're going to say that you are conducting an investigation into, I'll use drug dealing because that's an easy one for us all to know, but it can be for anything that you need to get a search warrant to go get evidence. All right, so you're going to describe then the location or the person or the thing that you want to search. Then you're going to talk about your probable cause. That's the next part. That's the body of the search warrant. The affidavit, where you're going to basically lay out your case for the judge so he or she can determine, based on what you tell them, that you have probable cause for them to issue a search warrant for you to go and seize evidence. And that's the right way to do it. We should always use a search warrant whenever possible, because it's a very solid legal process for going into somebody's home, into their car, or into their pockets to search for evidence. There are a lot of exceptions to the search warrant requirement, and those are usually exigent circumstances, when something is so emergency related that you don't have time to get a search warrant and you have to do the search. And you have to understand exactly what those exceptions to the search warrant are. Look at your state, figure out case law in your state, talk to your prosecutor, find out what they are, and make sure every officer in your agency understands those exceptions. Other than those exceptions that are recognized by the courts, you need to get a search warrant. So you do your affidavit. An affidavit, like I said, it builds that probable cause. So what you might say is, on this date, this officer spoke to an individual who wants to remain anonymous, but has agreed to assist this police agency with an investigation into the sale of illegal drugs, specifically heroin, ecstasy, and fentanyl, or whatever the drugs are. This individual is known to this officer, but will remain anonymous and will be referred to in this document as, there's a couple of different things you can call them. Confidential informant, a CI. That's something we hear all the time. I prefer confidential source, right? Confidential source sounds better. The public doesn't like informants. Nobody does. They are a confidential source of information. So I call them confidential source number 1, right? This officer spoke to confidential source number 1, who said that confidential source number 1 knows an individual named Harry Smith that sells heroin, cocaine, ecstasy, and fentanyl. So we do not use the confidential source's name. We do not use their gender. We do not use anything that can specifically identify them, because we're trying to protect them. All right, so it sounds funny when you say it. Confidential source 1 said confidential source 1 can purchase fentanyl from Harry Jones, right? It sounds funny and awkward, but you're doing that so you don't reveal any information about your confidential source. All right. So you go through this whole thing. On this date, confidential source one said confidential source one could purchase fentanyl from Harry Jones. Confidential source one said Harry Jones is described as, and everything you know about him, drives this kind of car, lives at this kind of house, and here's how he does his business. Confidential source number one says confidential source one can make a controlled purchase for this officer to demonstrate the sale of drugs by Harry Jones. And you go through the whole thing. You go, on this date, this officer met confidential source number one, and confidential source number one was searched and had no contraband on them, no money. I searched CS1's car, and there was no drugs or contraband or money in the car. I then provided CS1 with funds in the amount of $200 that came from our department's investigative fund. Okay. CS1 then drove to 123 Main Street, the home of Harry Jones, while being surveilled by this officer and 3 other officers. We maintained visual contact the entire time. CS1 did not stop anywhere between our prearranged meeting location and Harry Jones's house at 123 Main Street. I then watched CS1 enter 123 Main Street, and 5 minutes later, CS1 exited 123 Main Street, got in CS1's car, and drove to the prearranged location where CS1 turned over to me a quantity of fentanyl, heroin, and cocaine that CS1 said CS1 purchased from Harry Jones. That's your next paragraph. Now, you're going to continue on with this investigation, documenting all of these things that lead up to the probable cause that you're going to present to the judge. So, a couple things you need to understand. Your prosecutor's office may want you to make 2 controlled purchases or 3 controlled purchases before the judge will entertain a search warrant. The reason they do that is because they want to make sure that this person is actually selling drugs and not just helping you out, doing you a favor and loaning you some drugs. That's not a drug dealer. That's someone who's just sharing their drugs with you. So by making 2 or 3 purchases, you demonstrate probable cause to believe that this person, Harry Jones in this case, is actually selling drugs. So you want to find out from your prosecutor's office, how many purchases do they want? And then you document that in your affidavit. You field test the drugs each time you purchase them. Be careful with fentanyl. Make sure you do it appropriately. So you want to reach out and make sure you get guidance on how to field test fentanyl. Because, right, one little tiny speck of fentanyl can knock you down, can kill you. So do that correctly. Or cocaine or whatever it is. And then you would put that in there. This officer field tested the drugs purchased by CS1, believed to be fentanyl. And it came back positive for fentanyl using the Harry, whatever it is, the Joe Pangaro test kit number 305, whatever it is. And then you sum it up. Based on all of that information, this officer believes that Harry Jones is actively selling narcotics. There are narcotics in his home at this time. And this officer requests a search warrant to go and recover the drugs, the money, the records, and all that kind of stuff. All right, so that's the basis of your affidavit. The next part, if the judge approves, then there's an actual search warrant, and it says search warrant. And basically the wording in there is you are commanded. This is what this is the wording of the judge in your search warrant. You fill it out ahead of time and the judge signs it. You are commanded to enter upon 123 Main Street, 1972 Chevrolet Camaro with nice license plate Arkansas 30544 or whatever, in the doghouse, whatever it is that you've asked for. If the judge approves it, it's going to be in the search warrant. You will have an individual search warrant for each thing, for the house, the person, the car, the doghouse, whatever it is you're going to search. You'll have an individual search warrant. The judge then reviews that to make sure you covered all your bases, and then the judge will sign off on the search warrant. They will also want to know, what time do you want to service this search warrant? Most times, judges do not want you going to people's houses after midnight or before 5 a.m. because they consider it dangerous. People are sleeping. They don't know if you're a burglar coming in. They don't know what it is. Depending on the case you make to the judge, he or she may allow you to go 24 hours a day when you know they're home. If you've made that case in your search warrant that they're often not home until 3 o'clock in the morning, then you might get a 24-hour-a-day search warrant. So you got to be very specific with what you ask for on service. And then the judge will agree, sign off. Now you have your search warrant. You can go out then and you can serve your search warrant within that time frame. Whatever you seize during that search warrant, obviously you're going to document on a property report. What you then do after that, when you're all done, is you're going to do a return of a search warrant. It's called a return. You have to bring this return to the judge that issued the search warrant. And basically it says on this date and time, this officer and these other officers, whoever was there on your team, conducted a search warrant at 123 Main Street, and we recovered the following items. See attached property report. The judge reviews that, signs it, and puts the return with the search warrant and the affidavit all into a safe and keeps it for a record. So we now have a complete record that's closing the loop on a search warrant. Okay, so that's the basic process. Now let's talk about some of the specific names and things that are in there. So we already talked about a confidential source. So if you had 3 people that were going to provide you with information, you would call them CS1, CS2, CS3, and on and on and on if you have 20 confidential sources. There's another kind of a source of information that the courts look at very, very highly, and that's a concerned citizen, or a CC. So a concerned citizen is someone who's not your confidential source that's probably working off a charge or doing something to get help. That's why they're working for you. A concerned citizen is just what it sounds like. Might be a neighbor who calls up and says, hey, my name is Bob Smith, and my next door neighbor, this guy, Harry, I think he's selling drugs. There's people pulling up. They run up to the front door. They go in and out. They're in and out fast. A bunch of young people. I see them changing money at the front door, and I think it's drugs. That is called inherently reliable because it's from somebody who has nothing to gain. They're just telling you that. What you do with that information is now you, the law enforcement officer, go out and make observations based on what the concerned citizen told you. So you sit there and you watch the house and you see cars roll up between 5 and 7. People knock at the door. You see what looks like a hand-to-hand exchange. They get in their car and drive away, whatever. There's other investigative things you can do at that point. You can stop the car and you can interview those people and say, tell you I bought drugs and give it to you. You arrest them. That's going to be part of your affidavit, right? And then I stopped the car. We made observation. Concerned citizen 1, CC1, said CC1 believed a neighbor on the block of maybe 123 Main Street was selling drugs and described this. I, based on my training and experience, made observations, which I believe to be hand-to-hand drug transactions at the door of 123 Main Street. We observed this, stopped the car, people admitted to the drugs, gave us the drugs, and they were placed under arrest. Said they bought it from Harry Jones. So that's a concerned citizen. And unwitting, you might hear the term an unwitting or an unwit. An unwitting is a person who's helping you, but doesn't know they're helping you. So confidential source number 1 might say, I know Harry Jones is selling drugs, and I've gone there before, but I can't go by myself. I have to go with my friend, Melinda. She's the only one that can take me there. So you say, okay, call Melinda, see if she can go. And you do an overhear. That's another thing where you actually listen into the conversation. Hey, Melinda, this is CS1. Of course, you would use their real name. Listen, I need to get some heroin. Can you take me over to Harry Jones's house? Yeah, sure. I'll pick you up at 5 and we'll go. Right. So now you're going to have an unwitting because they're unwittingly helping you. Right. So that's when you hear that term. A controlled purchase. What is a controlled purchase? A controlled purchase is exactly what it sounds like. The police are controlling the purchase. So I described in our little scenario how when the confidential source shows up, you search them to make sure they have no drugs, contraband, or money on them. Then you search their car if you're going to let them drive their car. There's no drugs in there. What that does, that tells everybody that this person didn't bring drugs and they're making believe they bought from Harry Jones. They actually had nothing on them. You searched them. You gave them money from your investigative fund. They went to the location under surveillance, which means they didn't stop at 7-Eleven and buy drugs in 7-Eleven and then lie and say they bought it from Harry. You maintained surveillance on them the whole time. They went in, they came out, they came to the prearranged while you watched them the whole time. They didn't stop anywhere and they handed you suspected drugs. You field tested it. came up positive for cocaine. And now you write that all in your affidavit. That's how you're building this probable cause. So you have an unwitting, a concerned citizen, a confidential source, an overhear, where you actually overhear the conversation. These are all important terms. So what happens with this confidential source? You go make arrests, and are you going to charge them, the drug dealer, with what confidential source number one purchased for them to develop your probable cause? Usually you do not, because then the drug dealer has a right to confront witnesses. So if you're charging them with what they sold to confidential source one, you have to reveal who confidential source one is. So we don't want to do that. We only charge them usually with what they have at the location when we do the search warrant, or if we used an undercover officer and they went and made purchases. All right. So an undercover officer, since it's a police officer, and they go and they get introduced, or they know the drug dealer and they buy it, they can certainly charge him with everything they bought, with distribution, because it's a police officer and you're used to testifying. We want to protect our sources, our informants, because we don't want them to get injured because they worked for us. That's why we don't charge with what they bought. We just use it for probable cause, though you can. Can a defense attorney demand to know who your confidential source was? Yes, they can. And in that case, usually the prosecutor will dismiss the charges because they don't want to reveal the name of the source unless it's a really big case. And then they want to go forward, then they will reveal the name of your source. And that causes all kinds of problems, which is why they don't normally do it. Puts the source in danger. All right, so you have those terms to keep an eye by. Controlled by. Then there's the undercover by, where an undercover officer goes. You can certainly do a couple of control buys and then say, hey, Harry, do you mind if I bring my friend Ben Schmidt? He's a good buddy of mine. He's looking for something too. If he lets you and you bring the undercover officer with you, you introduce him as your friend Ben, and you should have a little backstory. You don't have to go crazy like on TV. You just want to know you work together at the pizza store, at the gas station, whatever, and that's how you're friends or whatever. You bring him in. The confidential source makes a purchase. Your undercover cop Ben makes a purchase, and then goes out the door. The whole idea is you want Ben to be able to go back by himself. Because if you charge them with what Ben bought that day, he's going to remember, hey, he was with that guy. That's who brought him, right? So you want to separate them by now, hey, can I give a call? Sure, man, you can call. You can come back. And then Ben, the undercover, would call and go on his own or her own, whoever your undercover is, and they would go and buy drugs, and then you can charge him with every single thing. The key here is that you introduce undercover Ben, obviously not as a cop, but as your friend. And then Ben introduces another friend. Maybe he brings Tina. And Tina's an undercover also. And then Tina brings Muriel. Next thing you know, lots of people are buying from this drug dealer, and they're all police officers. You get a very, very solid case if you do a thing like that. All right. So this is important to keep in mind. Pay attention to your local prosecutor. How do they want you to do this? How many buys do they want you to do? How would they want you to field test it? What do they want you to do? What we did is we went to the judge and the prosecutor in advance and said, we're going to do these drug cases. We'd be looking for help for our sources. So what does that mean, help for the sources? Well, number one, you can never promise anything to your source. You never promise you're going to get a charge dismissed. You're never going to get a fine dismissed. You're not going to get jail time dismissed. You have no power to do that. That's up to the judge and the prosecutor. So you got to be crystal clear. Do not make promises to your confidential sources. What you tell them is, I understand you want to get out from under this fine. You want to get out from under this charge. You want to get out from under jail time, whatever it is. I will speak to the prosecutor and let the judge know what you did to help us. Then it's up to them to make that decision. Now, what I always told people was that, listen, I can't make that decision to drop the charge, drop the fine, whatever. That's up to the judge and the prosecutor. But the judge and the prosecutor know how important it is for us to have people help us so we can clean up the streets around here. So they very, very often will do exactly that. But it's not up to me. It's up to them. You got to be clear about that. Then there's a whole list of rules. You have to have a rule sheet that you want the confidential source to follow while they're working for you, right? So this goes into informants, and we'll cover that more in an informants program. But the whole idea is that you don't want them going around saying they're a cop, because they will. You don't want them dropping your name when they get grabbed by other cops for doing things wrong that you don't know about. You want them to call you every single day to stay in contact. See how you control the source. You control them by making them do certain things, making them follow rules, and then everything stays copacetic. You're going to keep a file on your sources. So you have a photograph, you have their pedigree, you have their address, phone numbers, all that kind of stuff, and that's a confidential file. You do not necessarily have to turn that over to the defense. That's a confidential file. If they demand to know who the source was and the judge orders it, then you may. But normally we keep track of it because other officers might call to find out, hey, I'm going to use this person. Is she any good? She ever worked for you before? Yes. Here's the 3 jobs she did. They were successful. Or no, she was terrible. She lied. She cheated. I wouldn't use her. So that's kind of the stuff you need for your search warrant. So we got the what? The affidavit, which explains the probable cause to the judge. We have the search warrant, one for each thing you want to search. And then you have the return of the search warrant. All right. So the affidavit can cover everything. You can cover house, car, 3 people, a doghouse, an airplane, whatever. But each search warrant has to be unique to that particular person, place, or thing you want to search. And then you do a return. What did you get? What did you seize based on the search warrant at each location? And you document that, return it to the judge, and that closes the circle really nice and tight. Then you write your report, and off you go to court. All right. So I hope this is helpful. Search warrants are a tried and true method for helping an investigation, for getting the evidence that you need. It's recognized by the courts, and it's usually rock solid. You get a search warrant, you got a pretty good case. All right. Don't ever lie in a search warrant. Don't ever lie. Don't ever embellish. Don't make up a little thing to push it along. If you don't have enough information to get the probable cause, do more investigation. Make another buy. Find another source. Right? Don't make things up. Do the right thing. The judge will trust you. You'll build credibility in the court, the prosecutors, and you will make great cases. Search warrants can be done by any police officer. All right. So you want to learn how to do this. We also offer training on that. Pangaro training, pangarotraining.com. We do webinars, we do videos, we do all kinds of stuff to help train everybody. So be a part of the solution, my friends, not a part of the problem. Go get a search warrant. It's a fantastic way to conduct an investigation.